Sony has been on a downward spiral in regards to what content they allow on their platforms and what they now reject. They have drastically changed from allowing anything that was properly rated on their platform to forcing developers to censor and change their work if it did not fit into their guidelines. Guidelines that do not actually exist, and Sony has admitted this. There are no censorship guidelines that any of the employees follow, and every game is looked at on a case by case basis. And when there are no clear perimeters, that makes for very unfair situations for smaller developers, and what might be allowed by larger developers would not be allowed by said smaller indie developers. Now, this whole situation with Sony is not a new and groundbreaking topic. I have talked about it many, many times, as you guys know. I do keep always an eye on Sony because they are one of the worst culprits in the industry right now, but so many people do not really understand how far Sony is willing to go and what developers really have to deal with when it comes to creating a game that will potentially end up on a PlayStation system. I have talked about censorship in the industry a lot, and much of it comes from Sony. But people need to realize how important this really is. How important that it is to be aware of the company you are purchasing from. Back in April of 2019, one of Sony's representatives finally addressed the full year's worth of changes, saying that the company has established its own guidelines that they refuse to talk about or discuss in detail, and these guidelines are so that creators can offer well-balanced content on the platform because gaming does not inhibit the sound growth and development of young people. Even though numerous studies have said the contrary, they did not reference the studies that they were discussing because, of course, that is a typical Sony move. They also said two factors last year combined to turn that unease into action. One was the rise of the hashtag #MeToo movement in the United States, which pointed to the dangers of being associated with content that some might see as demeaning to women. The second was the emergence of channels on sites like YouTube and Twitch, obviously. They went on to comment how Japan also has more lax standards when it comes to more sexualized content than compared to the West. And in all, Sony is just afraid that people would be upset by content that was put on their platforms. Looking at how much different today is compared to just 10 or 15 years ago, social media has become such a prominent part of many people's everyday lives, where they can voice their opinions on what they like and what they dislike. And Sony honestly does not want to deal with that. They do not want to deal with outrage. They know how sensitive people can be to very simple situations now, and they just do not want any of those bad eyes on them. They probably figure from a business standpoint, it is better just to carefully wean out that type of content, allow some of it on the platform still, and eventually it will get to the point where they do not have to deal with anyone trying to put that content on their platforms because they may one day have guidelines that they actually follow when it comes to this content. I do not really know where they are kind of going with that, but ultimately, it's safe to guess that they are just going to eventually one day not allow any of that type of content on their platform anymore, unless it makes them a large chunk of money. Well-constructed content guidelines are not negative in any single way. They can be very useful to game developers and also for employees that have to review these games. Well-constructed content guidelines are not negative in any single way. They can be very useful for game developers and also for the employees that review these games. Also, consumers can expect a very specific quality standard to come out of a company, but when a large company like Sony does not have any clear guidelines, it creates a lot of confusion for all parties involved. This is a large and very booming industry. Microsoft and Nintendo have very clear and well written out guidelines for anyone to access. You can obviously tell out of the three companies which is acting like the badass that does not have to follow the crowd. They can do whatever they want just because they make a lot of money. They should really be watching out for their competition because they are losing a lot of consumers at a very fast rate, and that number will only go up moving into the next generation. This is a larger issue than just games receiving censorship and in some cases unfairly. Their system of how games are reviewed by an employee, then sent to an executive in rare cases, leads to another problem of individual preference, favoritism of companies, of people, franchises, and overall just personal preference put into your day-to-day work life. If someone reviewing a game dislikes the level of violence, gore, sexuality, political messages, or countless other things, it leaves anything to be the potential target of censorship. This is setting such a bad precedent for the future of the industry, with how many companies are tearing it down, such as EA, Rockstar, Activision, and others with their monetization systems that are being questioned by governments. We do not need companies telling us as adults what we can and cannot do. I am 100% for freedom of expression, but loot boxes are predatory. They mask themselves as enjoyable and ethical mechanics, and that is not why they exist. They exist for maximum profit, and they are not for the best interest of consumers. It is a major consumer advocacy problem. If a game is rated M for mature, why do mature aspects need to be toned down? The people that are purchasing these titles can choose what they want to see and what they do not want to see. If they do not want to play a game, they are not going to purchase it. Companies need to stop using the excuses that they are changing things for the children when children should not be accessing these titles. And obviously, if they are, the parents need to learn to use parental controls because they exist and they're really damn useful. Or you should stop purchasing the games for your children because obviously they cannot purchase it for themselves. Looking at other game companies like Epic Games when discussing the Epic Game Store, or Google discussing the Google Stadia, they do not allow any adult-only content and adult-rated content, and even though I do not support these platforms because of these and many other reasons, they at least were honest about it. From the inception of these platforms, they have said they will not allow this type of content and they will decline any of it. But Sony used to allow every type of content, and now they are just taking a step backwards, in my opinion. I used to love Sony. I used to go to Sony first whenever a fan service game came out that I really wanted to play because I knew that it would be on the platform. But now I barely touch my PlayStation 4 Pro, and I do not really plan on jumping on the PlayStation 5 when it releases. I am very content with the Nintendo Switch and the titles that they have to offer there, and I of course cannot tell you whether you can and cannot purchase something. Obviously, don't act like I can, but I personally will not support what Sony has done, and if these things bother you, speak with your wallet and stay away from what Sony is doing. There are other companies that are doing bigger and better things than Sony that deserve your money. But that is all that I wanted to talk about today, you guys. I really just wanted to kind of wrap up the past year of what Sony has been doing in case maybe you guys have missed my previous videos, or in case you are new to the topic, this is just a good video with all of the information placed into one. Please let everyone know your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to give it a like, and of course if you did not, make sure to give it a dislike. I appreciate the support either way. Make sure to subscribe if you are not already for more Sony censorship news. But I will talk to you guys again in the next video really soon.